They called it the most profitable day in human history. June 18th, 1815, the Battle of Waterloo. While Napoleon's army collapsed and thousands died in Belgian mud, one man in London was making a fortune that would reshape civilization. Nathan Rothschild didn't fight at Waterloo. He didn't command troops or fire cannons, but by the end of that day he had executed the most sophisticated wealth transfer in history. And the method he used, the formula he perfected, is running right now. Ukraine 2020. Same pattern, same profits, same victims. This isn't about conspiracy theories or ancient history. This is about a financial weapon that has been deployed 5 times in 2,000 years, each time creating unimaginable wealth for the same families while destroying entire nations. The Napoleonic Wars taught them the blueprint. World War I perfected it. World War II industrialized it. The 2008 crisis modernized it. And Ukraine is proving it still works. The formula is elegant in its brutality. Fund both sides, control the debt, own the reconstruction, repeat forever. But here's what they don't want you to understand. War isn't the product. War is the delivery system. The real product is debt. Permanent, unpayable, generational debt that transforms free nations into economic colonies. And right now, as Ukrainian cities burn and Western taxpayers fund the largest proxy war since Vietnam, the formula is generating profits that make Waterloo look like pocket change. So I'm going to show you how it works, how it's always worked, and why every major conflict of the last 200 years has been a wealth extraction operation disguised as geopolitics. The Waterloo Blueprint, how information becomes fortune. June 18th, 1815. The fate of Europe hangs in the balance outside a small Belgian village. Napoleon has escaped Elba. The coalition armies of Britain, Prussia, and their allies face the Grande Armée one final time. If Napoleon wins, French dominance continues. If he loses, British power reshapes the continent. Nathan Rothschild sits in London 2,000 miles from the battlefield, but he has something no other financier possesses: the fastest intelligence network in Europe. The Rothschild courier system makes governments jealous. They use carrier pigeons, relay riders, and fast ships. Information travels the Rothschild network twice as fast as official diplomatic channels. And information Nathan understands is the ultimate weapon. On the morning of June 20th, Nathan Rothschild knows Napoleon is defeated. He knows it 24 hours before the British government knows it. He knows it 48 hours before the London markets know it. And he uses that knowledge to execute the most profitable trade in history. Here's what happened. At 10 a.m. on June 20th, Nathan Rothschild walks onto the London Stock Exchange floor. British government bonds, called consols, are trading nervously. No one knows who won at Waterloo. No news has arrived. The market is paralyzed with uncertainty. Nathan starts selling massive quantities of British bonds, selling aggressively, publicly, obviously. Other traders see the Rothschild selling in panic. If Nathan Rothschild is selling British bonds, he must know something. Napoleon must have won. Britain must be facing defeat. The panic spreads. Everyone starts selling. British bond prices collapse. Within hours, they've lost 90% of their value. The British government's debt, the foundation of British power, becomes nearly worthless. And then Nathan begins buying, not publicly this time, through agents, through intermediates. Quietly, he buys British bonds at 5% of their morning value. He buys everything available, millions of pounds worth of British government debt at bankruptcy prices. On June 21st, official news arrives. Wellington has won. Napoleon is defeated. British bond prices explode upward. In 48 hours, Nathan Rothschild has turned a small fortune into the largest private wealth in Britain. He owns more British government debt than any single entity, except the government itself. But here's the key. Nathan didn't just make money. He gained control. By owning vast quantities of British government bonds, Nathan Rothschild now has leverage over British policy. The government needs to keep bond prices stable to maintain their credit rating. And Nathan, holding millions in bonds, can move those prices with his trading decisions. This is the foundation of the Rothschild formula. Use superior information to gain control of government debt during times of crisis. Once you own the debt, you own the government. And it's about to scale globally. World War I industrializing the formula. By 1914, the Rothschild model has spread across Europe. Not just the Rothschilds anymore, but a network of connected financial families. The Warburgs in Germany, the Morgans in America, all using the same playbook. Own the debt, control the government. But World War I presents an opportunity, unlike anything they've seen before. This isn't a regional conflict like the Napoleonic Wars. This is industrial warfare requiring unprecedented financing. Entire nations will need to borrow beyond their means. And someone has to lend to them. August 1914, war erupts across Europe. Britain, France, and Russia face Germany and Austria-Hungary. The costs are immediate and staggering. A single day of artillery bombardment costs more than a year of peacetime military budget. The governments have no choice. They must borrow, and the banks are ready. In London, the Rothschilds arrange British war bonds. In Paris, their affiliates handle French debt. In New York, J.P. Morgan becomes the primary agent for Allied financing. Between 1914 and 1918, the Allied governments borrow over $30 billion. That's $800 billion in today's money. But here's where it gets dark. The same banking networks that are financing the Allies are also, through their German affiliates, financing the Central Powers. The Warburgs, connected to the Rothschilds through marriage and business, arrange German war loans. The Deutsche Bank, with deep connections to international finance, handles Austrian bonds. Both sides are borrowing from the same sources. This isn't accident. This is strategy. By financing both sides, the banking families guarantee profit regardless of who wins. The British pay interest on their war loans. The Germans pay interest on theirs. The longer the war continues, the more debt accumulates. The more interest flows to the lenders. The war ends in November 1918. 4 empires have collapsed. 20 million soldiers are dead. And the banking families that financed both sides are now the creditors of the entire European continent. Germany owes billions in war reparations. Britain owes billions to American banks. France owes billions for reconstruction. Russia, now under Bolshevik control, has defaulted entirely, but the debt remains on the books. This is the Rothschild formula at industrial scale. Create the conditions for massive borrowing. Finance all parties. Collect interest from everyone. And when the war ends, own the reconstruction. But the formula is evolving. It's becoming more sophisticated, more hidden. By 1918, the public is starting to ask questions. Why do the same banks profit from every war? Why does debt increase regardless of who wins? So they adapt. They create complexity. Instead of one bank financing both sides directly, they create a network of seemingly independent institutions. Instead of obvious profiteering, they present themselves as patriots funding necessary wars. The formula doesn't change. It just becomes harder to see. World War II, the global expansion. By 1939, the financial networks that profited from World War I have spent 20 years preparing for the next conflict. They've learned from their previous success. This time, they won't just finance the war. They'll design the peace. September 1939, Germany invades Poland. Britain and France declare war. But the financial patterns from 1914 are already visible. The same banks that financed the previous war are positioning themselves for this one. In New York, the Federal Reserve begins expanding credit to support eventual war spending. In London, the Bank of England prepares for massive government borrowing. And in Germany, the Reichsbank has been financing rearmament since Hitler's rise to power. But there's a new player. The United States, which ended World War I as a creditor nation, is now positioned to finance the entire Allied war effort. The Lend-Lease program, beginning in 1941, exemplifies the evolved formula. Instead of direct loans, which create obvious debt relationships, the U.S. lends weapons and supplies to Britain and the Soviet Union. The debt is hidden in complex arrangements, but it's still debt. Britain receives $31 billion in Lend-Lease aid. That's $500 billion today. The Soviet Union receives $11 billion. France, China, and dozens of other countries receive billions more. All of it is debt, even when it's called aid. Meanwhile, American corporations are profiting from both sides. Standard Oil sells fuel to Germany through neutral countries. IBM provides calculating machines for German logistics. Ford operates factories in Germany throughout the war. This isn't treason. This is business. The formula requires financing all sides. And American corporations, like their banking partners, understand that war is opportunity. But the real innovation comes after the war ends. July 1944, while fighting continues in Europe. In the Pacific, Allied representatives meet in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Officially, they're designing the post-war monetary system. Unofficially, they're institutionalizing the Rothschild formula. The Bretton Woods agreements create the International Monetary Fund. In the World Bank, both institutions will lend to war-torn nations for reconstruction. But the loans come with conditions. Economic restructuring. Open market debt repayment schedules that ensure permanent borrowing relationships. This is the formula perfected. Instead of individual banks profiting from war debt, entire international institutions are created to manage global debt in perpetuity. The Marshall Plan, launching in 1947, demonstrates the new model. The United States will provide $15 billion for European reconstruction. That's $770 billion today. But it's not charity, strategic debt creation. European nations receiving Marshall Plan funds must spend the money on American goods, use American contractors, and adopt American economic policies. The debt creates dependency, and dependency creates control. By 1950, every major European nation is indebted to American financial institutions. The old European empires are gone, but a new empire has emerged. An empire of debt, controlled by the same banking networks that financed both world wars. The Rothschild formula has gone global. 2008, the crisis as feature, not bug. By 2008, the financial networks that perfected their formula through 2 world wars have spent 60 years expanding it globally. The World Bank and IMF have created debt relationships with 1990 countries. Every major nation is integrated into the same borrowing system. But there's a problem. The world is too peaceful. Regional conflicts generate some debt, but nothing like the massive borrowing that global wars create. The formula needs a new delivery system. The answer is financial crisis. 2007-2008, the housing bubble collapses. Major banks face insolvency. The global financial system teeters on the edge of collapse. Governments across the world respond with the largest bailout in history. But here's what most people miss. The crisis isn't the failure of the system. It's the system working exactly as designed. Let me show you the mechanics. From 2000 to 2007, major banks deliberately created a housing bubble through predatory lending. They knew the loans were unsustainable. Internal documents, later revealed in congressional investigations, show bank executives calling their products toxic waste and time bombs. But they continued lending because the goal wasn't sustainable mortgages. The goal was maximum debt creation followed by maximum bailout. When the crisis hits in 2008, the banks that created the problem become the beneficiaries of the solution. Bank of America receives $45 billion in bailouts. Citigroup receives $45 billion. JP Morgan Chase receives $25 billion. Goldman Sachs receives $10 billion. Meanwhile, millions of homeowners lose their properties. Retirement accounts evaporate, unemployment spikes to 10%. This is the Rothschild formula, updated for the modern era. Instead of financing both sides of a war, create a crisis that requires government intervention, then profit from both the crisis and the bailout. But the real innovation comes in the debt structure. The 2008 bailouts are financed through government borrowing. The Federal Reserve creates money to buy government bonds. Those bonds are sold to the same banks that are receiving bailouts. Let that sink in. The government borrows money to bail out banks. The banks lend that money back to the government at interest. The debt increases, the banks profit from the bailout, and from the debt created to fund the bailout. It's the perfect circular system. Crisis creates debt, debt creates profit. Profit funds the creation of the next crisis. And the model goes global. Greece receives bailout loans, with conditions that require austerity measures, benefiting international banks. Ireland receives bailouts that transfer private bank debt to taxpayers. Spain, Portugal, Italy all follow the same pattern. By 2010, global government debt has increased by $10 trillion. Not to fund infrastructure, or education or healthcare, to transfer private losses to public balance sheets. The formula that began at Waterloo has evolved into a permanent wealth extraction system. No wars required, just engineered crises followed by debt finance solutions. But they're about to test the ultimate version of the formula, using war and financial crisis simultaneously. Ukraine 2022, the formula perfected. February 24th, 2022, Russian forces cross into Ukraine. Within hours, financial markets respond with patterns that should look familiar by now. Defense stocks spike, energy prices surge, government bonds fluctuate wildly as investors seek safe havens. But beneath the surface, the Rothschild formula is activating on a scale that makes previous wars look primitive. The United States announces $54 billion in aid to Ukraine in 2022. Add to it, another $1,113 billion approved for 2023-2024. European nations commit additional billions by 2025. Western aid to Ukraine approaches $300 billion. But here's what the headlines don't tell you. This isn't aid, it's debt. Ukraine will owe every dollar to Western creditors. The mechanism is sophisticated. Instead of direct loans to Ukraine, Western governments borrow money from private banks and use it to fund Ukrainian assistance. Ukraine receives weapons and supplies, but owes the debt to Western institutions. Meanwhile, the same banks lending to Western governments are financing reconstruction contracts for American and European corporations. BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, has already signed agreements to manage Ukrainian reconstruction investments. This is the formula at its most elegant. Use taxpayer money to create debt for Ukraine. Use Ukrainian debt to guarantee contracts for Western corporations. Use corporate profits to buy the government bonds that funded the original debt. Every dollar flows in a circle that extracts wealth from taxpayers and concentrates it in financial institutions. But the Ukraine conflict demonstrates another evolution. The formula now includes resource extraction. Ukraine possesses some of the world's largest lithium deposits, essential for electric vehicle batteries. vast agricultural land that produces grain for global markets. Natural gas reserves in the Black Sea. The reconstruction loans will give Western corporations access to these resources at below market prices. The debt ensures Ukraine cannot refuse the terms. This is economic colonization through debt. The same model the IMF has used in Africa and Latin America for decades, now applied to Europe. And the profits are staggering. Lockheed Martin's stock price has increased 40% since the war began. Raytheon, General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman all report record profits, not from peaceful innovation, from conflict financing. Meanwhile, European taxpayers face energy inflation that has doubled heating costs. American taxpayers see $300 billion in spending while domestic infrastructure crumbles. The formula extracts wealth from the many and concentrates it in the few. War is the mechanism. Debt is the product. The modern formula, how it works today. Let me break down the current system so you understand exactly how your wealth is being transferred to financial institutions through engineered conflicts. Step 1. Create or escalate conflict. This doesn't require starting wars from scratch. Existing tensions can be amplified through weapons supplies, intelligence sharing, and diplomatic pressure. The goal is sustained conflict that requires massive financing. Step 2. Government borrowing. Democratic governments cannot directly tax citizens for war costs without political consequences. So they borrow from private financial institutions. This creates immediate debt and long-term interest obligations. Step 3. Corporate contracting war. Spending flows to defense contractors, energy companies, and reconstruction firms. These corporations use profits to purchase government bonds, creating circular debt flows. Step 4. Resource extraction. Post-conflict, reconstruction loans include terms that give creditor nations access to debtor resources. Natural resources, agricultural land, and strategic infrastructure are transferred to Western control. Step 5. Permanent debt relations. The debtor nation can never fully repay, ensuring permanent interest payments and continued policy control by creditors. This isn't theoretical, it's the exact pattern visible in Ukraine, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, and dozens of smaller conflicts. The financial institutions profiting from this system are the same ones that financed both sides of World War I and World War II. JP Morgan Chase traces its lineage to JP Morgan, who financed Allied war bonds. Goldman Sachs has participated in every major conflict, financing since World War I. The names change. The formula doesn't. Who benefits? The network today. The modern version of the Rothschild formula operates through a network of institutions that most people believe are separate but function as a coordinated system. BlackRock manages $10 trillion in assets, more than the GDP of the United States. Vanguard and State Street each manage over $8 trillion. Together, these three firms own controlling shares in every major corporation, including all major banks. These asset managers invest pension funds, retirement accounts, and institutional money. They profit when defense stocks rise during conflicts. They profit when energy companies benefit from supply disruptions. They profit when reconstruction contracts are awarded to companies they own. The Federal Reserve, theoretically a government institution, is actually owned by private banks. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York, which conducts most Fed operations, is owned by JP Morgan Chase, Citigroup, and other major banks. When the Federal Reserve creates money to buy government bonds during crisis spending, those bonds are often purchased from the same banks that own the Federal Reserve. This isn't a bug in the system. This is the system. The International Monetary Fund and World Bank, created at Bretton Woods, continue to operate as global debt creators. Both institutions are controlled by the same Western nations, whose banks profit from the lending. When the IMF lends to developing nations, the conditions require those nations to open their markets to Western corporations and prioritize debt service over domestic spending. The World Bank finances infrastructure projects that benefit Western contractors and create debt relationships that last decades. NATO itself has become a debt creation mechanism. Article 3 requires member nations to spend 2% of GDP on defense. This creates guaranteed demand for weapon systems produced by Western defense contractors. The Ukraine conflict has been used to pressure European nations to increase defense spending immediately. Germany announced a $100 billion increase in military spending. Poland, Finland, and other nations are rapidly expanding defense budgets. All of this spending is financed through government borrowing from private financial institutions. The pattern never changes. From Waterloo to Ukraine, the fundamental pattern remains identical. Use superior information or influence to create conflicts that require massive government borrowing. Finance multiple sides when possible. Profit from the conflict and the debt created to fund it. Use post-conflict reconstruction to extract resources and create permanent debt relationships. The scale has grown. The methods have become more sophisticated. The profits have become larger, but the essential formula remains the same. Nathan Rothschild made millions from one day at Waterloo. The modern financial network makes trillions from ongoing conflicts worldwide. And here's what should terrify you about Ukraine specifically. This isn't a regional conflict that will end with victory or defeat. This is designed to be a frozen conflict that generates debt and reconstruction spending for decades. The Korean War never officially ended. American troops remain in South Korea 70 years later. Defense spending continues. The debt relationships established in the 1950s continue. The same pattern is being established in Ukraine: permanent Western military presence, ongoing reconstruction loans, decades of debt service, and the profits will flow for generations. What this means for you:
every dollar spent on Ukrainian aid is borrowed money that you and your children will repay through taxes and inflation. Every defense contract creates profits for institutions that own your retirement accounts, giving them control over your financial future.
When energy prices spike during conflicts, you pay more at the pump, while energy companies report record profits. When food prices increase due to supply chain disruptions, you pay more at the grocery store, while agricultural corporations expand their margins. The formula extracts wealth from your daily life and concentrates it in institutions that use that wealth to finance the next extraction. This is why, despite technological advances that should reduce costs, everything becomes more expensive. The wealth you create through your labor is systematically transferred to institutions that profit from engineered scarcity and conflict, and it's accelerating. The Ukraine conflict demonstrates that the formula can now operate continuously. There will always be another crisis requiring massive government borrowing. Climate change will require trillions in spending. The China conflict will require expanded military budgets. The next financial crisis will require larger bailouts. Each crisis will follow the same pattern: government borrowing, corporate profits, debt concentration, wealth extraction. The Rothschild formula, perfected over 200 years in 5 major conflicts, has become the operating system of the global economy. Nathan Rothschild would recognize the modern system immediately. The scale is larger, the methods more complex, but the essence unchanged. Use crisis to create debt. Use debt to create control. Use control to create more crisis. The pattern never fails. Because the people running it wrote the rules, and they're not finished yet.